Ambassador K'zrith of the Droxx Imperium twitched his primary antennae in irritation as he surveyed the Grand Assembly Chamber of Space Station Concordia. The 327th Annual Galactic Council Summit was about to begin, and once again the humans were clustering at the back of the room. Absolutely infuriating. The Droxx were the undisputed apex species of the known universe. Their chitinous exoskeletons could withstand direct energy weapon fire. Their natural psychic abilities could crush lesser minds with a mere thought. Their battle fleets had subjugated 17 solar systems before the Galactic Accord was even drafted. By all rights, every other species should defer to them in matters of protocol and respect. And yet there they were, the humans casually leaning against the back wall as if they owned the place. Still obsessing over the mammals, came a bubbling voice from behind him. K'zrith turned his thorax a precise 37 degrees, the exact amount required to acknowledge a Miktari diplomat without showing excess respect. "I am not obsessing, High Emissary Gloop. I am observing a potential diplomatic irregularity," K'zrith responded, mandibles clicking with barely contained frustration. "The humans, they always do that." Gloop's gelatinous form shimmered with amusement. "Been that way since they joined 70 years ago. Nothing to get your exoskeleton in a twist about." "It is a clear violation of Council Seating Protocol. Section 7, Paragraph 12, clearly states that nobody follows those protocols anymore except the Droxx," Gloop interrupted, a small bubble popping at what passed for the being's mouth. "Besides, the last representative who tried to force a human to sit up front ended up with 3 trade agreements that somehow benefited Earth more than his homeworld. Curious that." K'zrith's compound eyes narrowed as he focused on the human delegation. Their chief representative, Ambassador Priya Kapoor, was engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation with a Zolaxian trade minister. Despite affecting an air of complete relaxation, shoulder propped against the wall, one leg crossed over the other, K'zrith couldn't help but notice how the Zolaxian's quills were gradually relaxing, a sign they were agreeing to something. "How do they do it?" K'zrith muttered. "They're physically the weakest sentients in the Council. No natural defenses, no special abilities. Their homeworld is barely habitable by galactic standards. And yet they've secured favorable trade positions in 3 spiral arms in less than a century," Gloop finished. "Mysterious, isn't it? Perhaps they're just very, very lucky." The chamber's atmospheric processors hummed as the gravity adjusted to accommodate the 87 different species present. Representatives from gas giants, ocean worlds, desert planets, and even one particularly adventurous sentient nebula took their assigned positions. Only the humans remained standing at the back, Ambassador Kapoor now scrolling through a data pad with apparent disinterest, as Grand Chancellor Vexthoian called the session to order. "The motion regarding the neutral zone mining restrictions requires immediate attention," the Chancellor announced. "The Droxx Imperium has expressed concerns about—" K'zrith prepared to deliver the carefully crafted 15-point objection his government had prepared, but before he could activate his translator, Ambassador Kapoor casually raised a single finger from where she stood against the back wall. "Point of order," she said, not even looking up from her datapad. "The Droxx concerns were addressed in the subcommittee last cycle. I believe we already have a compromise proposal ready for ratification." Somehow, impossibly, the Chancellor nodded. "Ah yes, the human-drafted proposal. Let us proceed with that instead." K'zrith's mandibles clacked together so hard that a nearby Floxian winced. "When did that happen? How did they manage to—" He glared back at Kapoor, who finally glanced up, caught his gaze, and had the audacity to wink at him. That settled it. Protocol or not, K'zrith would get to the bottom of this human war-leading mystery if it was the last thing he did as ambassador. A security investigation into seating preferences? Commander Vrex's mandibles twitched in what passed for Droxx confusion. "Yes, Commander." K'zrith paced the secure briefing room, his chitinous legs clicking precisely against the floor. "I want a full intelligence operation, surveillance, infiltration, psychological analysis, the works." "Sir, with all due respect, we have multiple defense scenarios to prepare for," The Vusan crystalline fleets are massing near the Cygnus border. Perhaps human furniture preferences could wait until... This is not about furniture. K'zrith slammed a clawed appendage on the table, leaving a small crack in its surface. There is a pattern here, a deliberate strategy. No species maintains such rigid behavioral consistency without purpose. Droxx had served in 5 interstellar conflicts and had 3 medals for psychic combat, but nothing in their training had prepared them for investigating why squishy bipeds preferred to stand against walls. As you command, Ambassador. Droxx sighed, a sound like sandpaper against metal. I'll begin immediately. 3 days later, Droxx found themselves in a civilian disguise, an absurd contraption designed to make them appear as a Floxian merchant, awkwardly hunched behind a nutrient dispenser in the station's central promenade. They were following junior human attaché Miles Chen, who was completely oblivious to the 6-foot arthropod warrior trying to hide behind a machine half their size. Commander, target has entered eating establishment, Droxx sub-vocalized into their communicator, proceeding to observe seating selection behavior. Inside the multi-species cafe, Droxx watched in fascination as Chen bypassed 6 empty tables to take a seat at the only one with its back against a wall. Even more curiously, Chen casually rotated his chair 15 degrees to maintain a clear sightline to both the entrance and the emergency exit. Fascinating, consistent with previous observations. When the Miktari server approached Chen, Droxx slid closer, audio enhancers at maximum. The usual, Miles, the gelatinous server burbled. Thanks, Bloop, and hey, any chance you could tell your cousin to stop sharing my coffee order with the Droxx intelligence officer following me around? It's getting awkward. Droxx froze, their camouflage hood suddenly feeling woefully inadequate. Chen turned directly toward them and waved cheerfully. Would you like to join me, Commander? This table has the best view in the house. Better acoustics, declared Science Officer Zhang when Droxx cornered her in the botanical garden, where, predictably, she had positioned herself against a wall of Venusian fire ferns. You sit against walls for acoustics. Droxx's antennae quivered with skepticism. Absolutely, human ears are unidirectional, you know, can't absorb sound properly without a nice solid surface to bounce it off. She smiled brilliantly. Basic physics. That explanation contradicted Attaché Chen's claim the previous day about following the ancient Earth tradition of wall-sitting to honor our cave-dwelling ancestors. Space sciatica, insisted Ambassador Kapoor when directly confronted in the diplomatic lounge. Terrible condition. Human spines simply can't handle central seating positions. Doctor's orders. But I observed you playing zero-G racquetball this morning, Droxx noted. Your spinal mobility appeared uncompromised. Therapeutic exercise, Kapoor beamed. Best treatment for space sciatica. Along with wall-sitting, of course. Droxx's report that evening was a masterpiece of frustrated intelligence work. Out of 17 separate observations, humans had provided 14 contradictory explanations for their wall proximity behavior, all delivered with suspicious cheerfulness. Subjects appear to be deliberately confounding investigation. Recommend psychological evaluation of entire human delegation. K'zrith read the report twice before responding. They're mocking us. Undoubtedly, sir. Intensify surveillance. I want cameras on every human, every moment. Sir, the Vusan ambassador has requested an urgent meeting regarding the fleet movements. They're threatening to consider our border patrols an act of aggression. K'zrith waved a dismissive claw. Standard diplomatic posturing. The crystallines always rattle their facets before trade negotiations. And the humans, sir, they seem unconcerned by the rising tensions. Precisely my point. K'zrith's eyes glittered with certainty. While everyone focuses on the Vusan, the humans are negotiating minor trade deals for obsolete space stations along the Perseus arm. What are they planning? Why those specific stations? And why do they always stand with their backs protected? On the surveillance screen behind them, Ambassador Kapoor was visible in the human embassy, casually leaning against yet another wall while finalizing purchase agreements for 3 decommissioned outposts. Her expression showed nothing but pleasant boredom, even as the emergency alert system flashed warnings about Vusan fleet movements. "Sir," Vrex ventured carefully, "perhaps we are overthinking this? Maybe humans just like wolves?" K'zrith's glare could have melted tritanium. "Commander, no species survives interstellar politics through random habits. I want answers, and I want them before the summit concludes." "Yes, sir," Vrex replied, wondering if there was a psychiatrist on the station qualified to treat Droxx obsession disorders. The conspiracy theories. By the fourth day of the summit, K'zrith's investigation had transformed from a minor diplomatic inquiry into the station's favorite gossip topic. Species that normally couldn't agree on the definition of breathable atmosphere were suddenly united in rampant speculation about human wall-sitting behavior. In the Grand Assembly's hydration lounge, High Emissary Gloop of the Miktari was holding court, his gelatinous form rippling with excitement. "It's obvious when you think about it," Gloop burbled to a captivated audience of diplomats. "Humans have latent telekinetic abilities that only function in proximity to solid surfaces." "Absurd," countered Ambassador Flex of the Floxians, whose quivering spines betrayed interest despite her dismissive tone. "Our medical scans clearly indicate they're concealing additional limbs beneath those loose garments they wear, probably retractable tentacles, very useful for secret communications." Zorlaxian Ambassador Zerlor made a sound like grinding glass, their species equivalent of derisive laughter. "You're all missing the obvious. Humans aren't physical beings at all. They're sophisticated holograms projected from the walls. That's why they never stray far from surfaces. Their emitters have limited range." "Then how do you explain the fact that I beat one at racquetball yesterday?" demanded Gloop. "Clearly, your ball passed through the hologram and they manipulated station sensors to make you think contact occurred," Zlor replied smugly. From his concealed observation post, K'zrith recorded every theory, no matter how outlandish. The Droxx prided themselves on empirical analysis, but even he had to admit the evidence was confounding. "Ambassador, we've compiled a spatial analysis of human property acquisitions over the past 30 years, Commander Vrex reported, projecting a galactic map into the air. Red dots illuminated 17 separate locations. They've been quietly purchasing outdated space stations and outposts throughout neutral territories." K'zrith's compound eyes narrowed. "What strategic value do these locations provide?" "That's just it, sir. Individually, none. They're obsolete facilities with outdated technology. But when mapped collectively," Vrex manipulated the display, connecting the dots with lines. "They form a peculiar web that intersects with major trade routes and borders, multiple territories, including our own." "A surveillance network," K'zrith hissed. "Possibly, though why use ancient technology when modern systems are available?" "The perfect cover," K'zrith decided, pacing frantically. "No one questions old stations that have been there for generations. What have the humans installed in these facilities?" "Unknown, sir. Each purchase was completed through legitimate channels, with full transparency regarding ownership. But their internal modifications remain undisclosed." K'zrith's mandibles clicked rapidly, a Droxx sign of intense agitation. "And their wall behavior is connected somehow. It must be. Nothing is coincidental in galactic politics." The following day brought the interspecies cultural exchange, a summit tradition designed to foster understanding through artistic performances. K'zrith saw it as the perfect opportunity to force a confrontation. The Droxx delegation had carefully rearranged the seating in advance. All wall-adjacent chairs had been removed, leaving only central seating options. K'zrith watched with barely concealed anticipation as the human delegation entered the chamber. Ambassador Kapoor surveyed the room, her expression unchanging. "How lovely," she commented to no one in particular. Then, with a graceful motion, she stepped into the center of the room. "Before we begin the scheduled performances, the Earth delegation would like to present a traditional human dance form," she announced. "We call it interpretive spatial movement." What followed was 30 minutes of humans spinning, twirling, and gyrating throughout the chamber, in what appeared to be random patterns. By the end, they had somehow rearranged the entire room without anyone noticing, creating a semicircle of chairs against the back wall, where they promptly seated themselves. K'zrith's antennae twitched in disbelief. Did they just— Yes, sir, Rex confirmed. Somehow they manipulated the entire chamber configuration through dance. Telekinesis, whispered Gloop from nearby. I told you. 2 days later, K'zrith tried again. The emergency response drill provided perfect cover. All delegates were required to assemble in the central safety zone, well away from any walls. The humans arrived last, and Science Officer Zhang paled visibly when she saw the arrangement. I'm afraid I can't participate, she announced. I'm suffering from an acute case of frontothoracitis. That's not a real medical condition, the Droxx medical officer protested. Oh, it absolutely is, Zhang insisted, producing an official-looking document with Earth medical seals. Very serious. Symptoms include dizziness, spatial disorientation, and spontaneous molecular dissolution when positioned away from structural supports for more than 3 minutes. Molecular dissolution is impossible for carbon-based life forms, the medical officer sputtered. Tell that to my cousin Rajiv, Zhang said solemnly. 1 minute he was giving a presentation at the front of a classroom, the next, poof, nothing left but his shoes and a calculator. Somehow, the humans were granted medical exemption from the drill. K'zrith was running out of patience. The summit would conclude in just 2 days, and the Vuzon conflict was reaching a critical point. If he didn't solve the human mystery soon, he'd return to the Droxx Imperium with nothing but wild theories and embarrassing failures. In my final attempt, he informed Rex. Tonight's diplomatic reception. We'll isolate the human assistant, Miles Chen. He's the least experienced of their delegation, more likely to reveal something under pressure. The plan was executed with military precision. As Chen entered the reception, Droxx security personnel subtly repositioned themselves, blocking access to walls. Meanwhile, K'zrith had the central table reconfigured with a single open seat, surrounded by Droxx diplomats. Attaché Chen, K'zrith called with false joviality. Please, join our discussion on interspecies trade regulations. Chen scanned the room, clearly noting his lack of options. For the first time, K'zrith observed genuine discomfort in a human's expression. Fascinating. I'd be honored, Ambassador, Chen replied, his usual cheerfulness strained. Once seated in the center of the room, Chen's behavior changed markedly. He maintained conversation but repeatedly glanced toward exits. His right hand kept returning to his communication device, tapping what appeared to be a coded sequence. Sweat, a human anxiety response, beaded on his forehead. Is something wrong, Attaché? K'zrith asked innocently. You seem uncomfortable away from your usual position. Not at all, Chen replied, his smile tightening. Though I must admit, I'm not used to being the center of attention. K'zrith leaned forward, all 4 of his eyes focused intently on the human. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable explaining why your species is so averse to centralized positioning, or why you've been purchasing obsolete space stations throughout neutral territories. Chen's comm device chimed, and relief washed over his features. He checked the message and suddenly relaxed. Actually, Ambassador, I'd be happy to discuss both topics, he said, confidence returning. But first, I believe the Vuzon ambassador is attempting to get your attention. Something about fleet movements? K'zrith turned to see the crystalline ambassador indeed heading their way, facets glinting with what appeared to be agitation. When he looked back, Chen was already halfway across the room, somehow having extricated himself from the surrounded table without anyone noticing, and predictably heading straight for the nearest wall. The final day of the summit began with nervous energy vibrating through Space Station Concordia. The Vuzon delegation had arrived with twice their usual number, their crystalline bodies refracting light in aggressive patterns that every species recognized as a pre-conflict display. The Droxx delegation matched this show of force, K'zrith's security detail now prominently displaying ceremonial psychic amplifiers. Ambassador Kapoor entered the Grand Assembly Chamber last, her team moving directly to their usual positions along the back wall. K'zrith noticed Chen whispering something into his comm device while running his hand along a seemingly ordinary wall panel. The Galactic Council will now address the territorial dispute regarding the Cygnus border zone, announced Grand Chancellor Vex Thoyan, their voice amplified throughout the chamber. Ambassador K'zrith of the Droxx Imperium will present first, followed by Ambassador Zintal of the Vusan Federation. K'zrith stepped forward, his prepared statement forgotten as he fixed his compound eyes on the human delegation. Before I address the border situation, I demand an explanation from the human delegation regarding their suspicious activities, he declared. For weeks they have exhibited abnormal positional behavior, engaged in unauthorized purchases of strategic facilities, and consistently undermined proper protocol. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Ambassador Kapoor raised an eyebrow but remained silent, still leaning against her beloved wall. The drops are deflecting from their unprovoked aggression, Crystalline Zental's voice shattered through the chamber, facets flashing dangerously. 3 of our observation vessels were atomized near the border yesterday. Your observation vessels were military scouts with disruptors powered and targeting systems active, K'zrith countered, mandibles clicking rapidly. The Droxx Imperium will not tolerate. Enough! Zintal's voice resonated at a frequency that cracked 3 nearby viewing screens. The Vusan Federation officially withdraws from the Galactic Accord, effective immediately. What happened next occurred so rapidly that later testimonies would conflict dramatically. The Vusan delegation suddenly emitted a blinding flash of light, a known precursor to their species' natural energy discharge weapon. Simultaneously, several Droxx security officers activated their psychic amplifiers in response. The station's main systems reacted to the energy surge, interpreting it as an attack. Emergency protocols engaged, blast doors slammed shut, and the lighting systems failed completely. Panic erupted in the darkness. "They're trapped," screamed someone, likely a Miktari, judging by the bubbling quality of the voice. "The Vusan are attacking," shouted another. "My exoskeleton is cracking in this pressure," came a third voice. K'zrith attempted to activate his emergency beacon, but all communication systems were dead. In the pitch darkness, he could sense the psychic energy of his security team building to dangerous levels, a defensive response that, in this enclosed space, would likely kill half the delegates. "Hold your positions," he commanded his forces, struggling to be heard above the chaos. "Maintain psychic discipline." Then something extraordinary happened. Soft blue light began emanating from the chamber's back walls, precisely where the humans had been standing. K'zrith watched in astonishment as Ambassador Kapoor and her team calmly extracted what appeared to be control panels from concealed compartments. Working with practiced efficiency, the humans activated these devices. Immediately, a series of previously invisible force field emitters throughout the chamber hummed to life. Targeted fields formed between the Vusan and Droxx delegations, containing the energy discharges from both species. Auxiliary power came online, but not through the station's main systems. Instead, a secondary power grid, one K'zrith had never known existed, illuminated emergency pathways and re-established life support. "Please remain calm," Ambassador Kapoor's voice echoed through the chamber, somehow patched into a communication system separate from the station's main array. "The security containment system is functioning as designed. Neutral mediators will be permitted to approach the central platform in approximately 30 seconds. K'zrith stared in disbelief as Science Officer Zhang pressed her hand against what had appeared to be solid wall, causing a panel to slide open and reveal a sophisticated weapons locker. From it she extracted not weapons, but advanced medical kits, which her team began distributing to delegates affected by the energy surge. What is the meaning of this?" K'zrith demanded, finding his voice as he approached Kapoor. "These systems are not in any station schematic. This technology is not registered with the Council." Ambassador Kapoor glanced up from her control panel, her expression calm but serious. "Correct, Ambassador. This is Human Emergency Protocol 37B, implemented roughly 60 years ago, shortly after we joined the Galactic community." 60 years? K'zrith's antennae twitched violently. "You've been installing unauthorized systems in Galactic Council facilities for 60 years? "Not unauthorized," Capwood corrected, making a small adjustment that strengthened the containment field around a particularly agitated Vusan emissary. The original proposal was approved unanimously by the Council. It's in the records under Station Maintenance Auxiliary Support in subsection 147G. But why? K'zrith began. Because we're the physically weakest species in the known universe, Ambassador, Kapur said simply. We have no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, no armored exoskeletons or energy discharge capabilities. What we do have is an exceptional talent for preparing for worst-case scenarios. Around them, the human team continued to work, accessing hidden systems, stabilizing environmental controls, and gradually restoring order to the chamber. Miles Chen was coordinating with teams throughout the station via a communication network entirely separate from the station's compromised main systems. The stations you've been purchasing, K'zrith realized. Backup hubs, Chen confirmed, not looking up from his work. Redundant systems. Once we realized how vulnerable galactic infrastructure was to attack or malfunction, we started creating our own safety networks. Every human who serves in galactic institutions is trained to monitor and maintain these systems, Kapur explained. We don't advertise it because that would defeat the purpose of having undetectable backup systems, hence our preference for positioning against walls, K'zrith finished, compound eyes widening with comprehension, where the access panels are hidden. On the main floor, mediators were now safely moving between the contained Droxx and View Zone delegations. The emergency was being managed with remarkable efficiency by systems K'zrith had never known existed. While the strongest species evolved focusing on ways to project power, Kapur said with a small smile, we evolved focusing on how to survive when things go wrong. It's not a psychic ability or a secret weapon, Ambassador. It's just human nature. We hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. K'zrith finished, a new understanding dawning. All this time, you weren't plotting against anyone. You were protecting everyone, Kapur nodded, including you. 3 days after what station logs officially recorded as the Concordia Incident, the Galactic Council reconvened in emergency session. The Vusan and Droxx delegations sat on opposite sides of the chamber, their previous hostilities temporarily overshadowed by a new topic of interest. Humanity's secret security network. Ambassador Kapur stood at the central podium, a rare position for a human, addressing the assembled delegates. As I've explained to the Security Committee, these systems were never intended as espionage tools, she clarified. They're purely defensive in nature, designed to activate only during critical emergencies when primary systems fail. Yet you concealed their existence for 70 years, K'zrith noted from his position. The Droxx Imperium finds this concerning. Not concealed, Ambassador. The documentation was filed appropriately. It's hardly our fault that no one reads past Appendix 12 in maintenance protocols. Kapur replied with a smile that somehow managed to be both diplomatic and slightly mischievous. Besides, a backup system that everyone knows about becomes a primary target in conflicts. Grand Chancellor Vex Thoyan's voice resonated through the chamber. The Oversight Committee has verified Ambassador Kapur's claims. The Human Emergency Network has apparently prevented 17 major station failures over the past 6 decades. We simply weren't informed when they On Earth, we have a saying, Kapur continued, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and expect to be surprised anyway. It's not fear that drives us to create these safeguards, it's pragmatism. When you're the physically weakest species in known space, you develop other strengths. From his seat, K'zrith observed the human delegation, now standing in various positions throughout the chamber, rather than clustering at the back. His initial humiliation at having his investigation end so unexpectedly had evolved into a reluctant respect. The humans had identified vulnerabilities no other species had bothered to address, then quietly solved them without seeking recognition. It was impressively efficient. The Council proposes a formal acknowledgement of Earth's contribution to galactic security, the Chancellor announced. Furthermore, We recommend establishing a joint task force to integrate these human systems with our primary networks for better oversight. We would be honored to participate, Ambassador Kapoor replied, though we suggest maintaining some systems as independent backups. Redundancy is the mother of reliability. Another Earth saying. As the session concluded, K'zrith noticed something odd. Delegates were subtly but definitely maneuvering toward the back walls. The Miktari representatives had somehow jellied their way into 3 prime corner positions. 2 Zorlaxians were engaged in a quiet but intense dispute over a particular section of wall that, K'zrith now realized, likely contained one of the human access panels. By the next day's session, the behavior had become impossible to ignore. Species that had never shown positional preferences were arriving hours early to secure spots along the chamber's perimeter. The Phloxians had developed a sudden interest in wall acoustics, while a Vusan diplomat claimed a patch of back wall for crystalline resonance alignment, whatever that meant. The humans, meanwhile, had adopted an entirely new seating strategy. Ambassador Kapoor and her team now placed their chairs in the center of rooms, backs to each other, in a small circle, from which they could observe the entire chamber. A classical Earth defensive formation, Chen explained when K'zrith inquired. We call it circling the wagons, very effective for watching all approaches simultaneously. When asked why this formation wasn't necessary before, Science Officer Zhang merely winked and said, "Someone has to keep an eye on the ceiling, right?" K'zrith's antennae twitched as he glanced upward, suddenly wondering what security systems might be embedded there. "I must admit, Ambassador Kapoor, that I misjudged your species," K'zrith acknowledged later that evening in the diplomatic lounge. The Droxx and human delegations had arranged this private meeting to clear the air, a courtesy K'zrith would have considered beneath him a week earlier. "A natural misunderstanding," Kapoor replied, sipping from her glass of Terran whiskey. "Most species expect threats to be obvious. The Droxx have always relied on visible strength," K'zrith said, mandibles moving in the equivalent of a thoughtful frown. "The concept of preparedness without demonstration is foreign to us. Different evolutionary paths lead to different survival strategies," Kapoor shrugged. "Your ancestors could fight off predators directly. Ours had to be clever, set traps, watch for danger, and always have an escape route." K'zrith's compound eyes studied her with new appreciation. "I wonder what other secrets humans might be hiding in plain sight. Your species is more complex than we initially assessed." Ambassador Kapoor's lips curved into an enigmatic smile. "Have you ever wondered why we insist on preparing all the coffee at diplomatic functions?" K'zrith's antennae suddenly stood straight up, the Droxx equivalent of alarm. "I'm joking, Ambassador," Kapoor laughed, raising her glass in a toast. "Probably." As K'zrith's antennae twitched with newfound paranoia, he made a mental note to bring his own beverages to future functions, just to be safe. After all, he was learning to prepare for the worst.